Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. In this heat wave, we are facing water shortages. River levels have not been as low as this for many decades. To discuss the implications of this, we're joined by Arslan Suleymanov. Mr. Suleymanov, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Good evening. It is a pleasure to join, absolutely. I hope you're also surviving this heat wave out there in Poland, because in Vienna it's been scorching. It's almost 40 degrees here, an absolute temperature record from what I've heard in about 100 years.
Yeah.
So absolutely, it is a pleasure.
Thank you. At least we're in an air-conditioned area. So
amazing.
We're having an issue with the levels of the water in rivers and other water sources, and that is affecting fundamentally the way in which our nuclear power plants are operating. What's the connection, please?
So the connection in this regard, because the drought itself and the lowering water levels are happening at an interesting political moment for countries that have the Danube flowing through its territories. So if we look at Romania, for example, it's currently still facing a crisis with its caretaker governments. In Moldova, with the new government being recently sworn in, the situation is the same. And also there was recently a motion to raise a vote of confidence towards the Moldovan president. So the significance of that lies precisely in the political momentum, and also in the fact that several of the existing power plants, including the Paks power plant in Hungary and Romania's Cernavoda plant, are obviously interconnected. And what is currently going on there with the lowering water levels and the consequences on the power plants will undoubtedly have the impact on the region's economic security as a whole, and can potentially cascade or let's say cause a spillover towards several, or intersect at least, with several other crises, such as the war in Ukraine and the rise of populism in Europe.
So let's take them one at a time. You talk about economic security. Talk us through why that is. I mean, let's take Hungary, for example, where nuclear power provides about 40% of Hungary's electricity. Right now, it's not operating at full output. How does that impact economically?
Yes, exactly. So, as you know, Hungary is a battery powerhouse in Europe. And of course, one would suggest that this issue could potentially impact Hungary's industrial capacity. Although the reports that I'm reading so far suggest that, first of all, not the entire power plant is being shut down. So there's still, I think, one of the 4 reactors is still functioning. I would say that we still have to see, when it comes to Hungary, we still have to see the long-term economic security impact. But where it is more pronounced is in Romania and Moldova, because from what I'm aware, Romania is currently importing electricity from Ukraine through Moldova, which contributes to rising energy prices in Moldova, and obviously gives some economic security leverage to Ukraine and to Russia in turn, as a result, whether or not they will decide to potentially launch strikes on the electricity facilities in Ukraine. So this is the economic security angle that I would watch for, particularly, as I said, in Romania and Moldova. For Hungary, we still have yet to see whether or not it's going to have impact from the economic security perspective. Again, if we are to switch to my original point on the political dimension of the whole crisis, of the whole thing, obviously, just as it is the case in Romania and Moldova, it is going to be a sort of a political trial for the Prime Minister Magyar in Hungary, which, again, we have yet to see how in the coming weeks Hungary is going to deal with this and what kind of political implications will come from that.
OK, well, let's talk political implications. I mean, building a nuclear power plant is a political implication, especially political decision.
Especially in Hungary.
Especially when we're talking about net zero goals and so on. But at the end of the day, can we really get away from hydrocarbons being used to generate energy, perhaps as a backup for nuclear power?
I don't think so. That's my expert take and the research that I've conducted previously, particularly also in light of the recent revision of the emissions trading system. I don't think that that would be possible. But from the political perspective, again, we have to take into account the fact that the Paks nuclear plant it was constructed, it was built during the Soviet time, and still the Rosatom, the Russian state energy corporation, is still involved in that. So obviously, whether or not Madar, so far, I think it's out of question, but whether or not Madar will pursue the course of diversifying its energy sources, like shifting away from Russia to some extent as well in this regard. So something that would need to be considered later, definitely.
Okay, now you mentioned the fact that Romania and Moldova are importing electricity from Ukraine. Ukraine's having its power grid attacked by Russia and has
Exactly.
for years. So this is not a sustainable solution, is it?
Absolutely. It's not a sustainable solution, both from this point of view of the infrastructure security. So, as I said, Russia may use this as a leverage to bomb certain electricity infrastructure facilities in Ukraine, but also from the financial point of view, because we already see that, like, apart from all the higher purchasing costs that we see elsewhere, in Hungary, in Austria to a greater extent as well, Moldova, because of the MOU that they signed with Ukraine and Romania back in 2023, is also facing higher purchase costs, and it's much more dependent on regional supply in this regard, particularly from Ukraine.
Okay, so what alternatives, if we're looking at the EU-wide picture, what alternatives do we have in terms of sources of electricity where it's needed, where, for example, Romania, Moldova, but other countries as well, I'm sure?
Yeah, so in this regard, Hungary can be considered as an example because being a battery hub, it's also a hub for renewable energy, solar in particular. So this is something that other countries could potentially take as an example. Of course, there are certain drawbacks to that because in most cases, when it comes to solar energy, it comes with Chinese investment, which Europe is currently trying to essentially decrease in a way. So, but renewable energy could be the alternative. And in addition, we can obviously consider several projects, the existing projects within the 3Cs initiative. So if we are to look at the Trans-Adriatic pipeline and also potentially the currently planned Trans-Caspian pipeline, I think that this is the direction when it comes to non-renewable sources that those countries can potentially, and of course, they may not be directly connected to those certain infrastructure projects and pipelines, but this is the direction that can be pursued, and additional connecting facilities can be built in the future in this regard, because this is not the first time that we are experiencing those water shortages on the Danube. So one of the most significant ones was in 2018, then we also had one in 2015, 2003, and etc. So this is just yet another lesson that diversification is key and transition to renewables as well.
Yes, and it promises perhaps to continue to be in this way. In other words, the water levels are expected to continue to drop in the summer as temperatures rise. Why has this, I mean, you just laid out a whole series of events where we've faced this issue, and yet it seems as though no government has done anything about it. Why?
I mean, I would say that it would be quite premature to say that no government has done anything about it. But one thing that we need to consider is that obviously when it comes to renewable energy and when it comes to water security, the farmers and certain political groups that lobby on behalf of farmers in countries like Romania, for example, do have their say. And of course, in Poland, this issue is much more pronounced. But yeah, so far, certain measures may or may not have been implemented because of that, because of specific interest groups that may be pursuing their own objectives, which results in specific policy decisions.
Okay, now moving wider afield, do you see energy being used as a military, if you like, a weapon? In other words, a militarization of energy in the same way as migration, for example, is being militarized, or hacking of computers and so on, hacking of information systems. Is this the weapon of the future?
I do, absolutely. And I wouldn't say that it's the weapon of the future. It's also a weapon of the past. I mean, look at Nord Stream and look at what was happening with Germany's energy dependence on Russia in the past. And I think the Russians would be smart enough to essentially monitor the situation and potentially weaponize it by bombing certain electricity facilities and power grids in Ukraine, and as a result, exerting political pressure on Moldova, because there's currently an ongoing scandal between Russia and Moldova as well, following the governors of the arrest of the governor of Gagauzia. So I think that the Russians would be smart enough to use it to their leverage, and of course weaponize it and use it within their overall military perspective, or military technical strategy, as they like to call it.
Okay, now, I mean, we've talked so far about the European Union, we've talked about Ukraine, but what about in Russia? Are they feeling the same pain when it comes to generation, or not? Are they kind of entirely reliant on fossil fuels, which covers their needs?
I mean, yeah, but that would be a totally different crisis and a different direction, a different dimension to consider, because obviously they do not have access to the Danube, and they are facing a whole range of other issues, such as their oil refinery facilities being bombed by Ukrainian drones. So the fuel shortage is absolutely real, as we have seen for instance, that they have their apps that citizens in Russia are using to see whether or not certain gas stations actually have fuel. So they do face their own energy crisis, but of course it is of a totally different nature and a totally different dimension to look at, essentially. And yeah, they're also working towards, when it comes to natural gas, for instance, they have secured some contracts with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to some extent to import their gas from there, and the gas stations or any other energy facilities owned by Russia in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in particular have temporarily halted their operations because of the situation that we saw in Russia, particularly in July. Now the situation is slightly different because the bombings have not halted, but there are much less of those bombings compared to what we saw in July. But yeah, it's a crisis of different nature, and they're obviously implementing their own measures. Absolutely.
Right. So they're not affected by the heat wave. They can continue to generate.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Suleymanov of Visegrad Insight, thank you very much indeed for your analysis, and have a good evening.
Thank you for having me. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye now. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.